Thanks for joining us today on this edition of Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Before we get started, let's first get a quick check of today's highlights. Korea's central bank holds its key interest rate steady at a record low as the bank monitors the impact of its surprise rate cut in June, coupled with the government stimulus package. With the closure of Kaesong Industrial Complex passing the half-year mark, we take a look at what impact this has had on the two Korea's economies as well as the companies involved. These stories and more coming right up. As widely expected, the Bank of Korea froze its key interest rate at 1.25% as it waits to see the impact of stimulus measures unleashed back in June. Arirang starts us off.
Korea's central bank took a wait-and-see approach in August as it held its monthly monetary policy meeting on Thursday. It kept its key interest rate unchanged at 1.25%, leaving it at its historic low for the second straight month. The Bank of Korea's decision was in line with market expectations that it will want to see whether the government's stimulus package, coupled with a rate cut in June, will help bolster the economy that's been in the doldrums. The top central banker said he is fully aware of the risks stemming from low key rates.
Financial watchdogs are implementing and reviewing various measures to tackle household debt. The BOK is also closely monitoring the effects of these measures, as we agree it's not desirable for this debt to rise for a prolonged period of time. If needed, the bank will also consider taking measures.
Despite the government's tighter guidelines on loans, they have not been able to slam the brakes on snowballing debt levels. The total amount tops $1 trillion. Concerns are growing that a possible rate hike from the U.S. Federal Reserve could exacerbate the problem, as Korea will eventually face the need to follow suit due to risks of massive capital outflows. But with external uncertainties like Brexit and better-than-expected second-quarter growth mainly boosted by the government efforts to stimulate spending, speculation for another rate cut in the last quarter this year is on the rise.
Without the swift passing of the supplementary budget, I don't think that the recovery will continue. So unto the second half of the year, the BOK might see some downside risks, and they will give more dovish comments.
And although being very cautious, the top central banker did leave the door open for additional rate cuts. While the BOK governor said it's true that the country's key interest rate is inching towards the so-called lower bound after a series of gradual rate trims over the years, he added that there's still room for more easing down the line. Hwang Ji, Business Daily.
It's been dubbed the innovation of the phablet. Samsung Electronics officially unveiled the Note 7, its latest addition to the Galaxy series, on home turf at a media event on Thursday. The phablet costs about $890 and it looks a lot like the Galaxy S7 Edge. But it does come with improved S Pen features. Not only can users use their S Pen underwater, they can also use it to translate a foreign language. The Note 7 also comes with iris recognition, promising users more security and privacy, the first feature of its kind in the Galaxy series. The head of the mobile division, Ko Dong-jin, says he hopes Samsung's latest device will open up a new era for the global tablet smartphone market. The Note 7 will hit the shelves next Friday. Korea's elderly population is on the rise, and one major think tank cautions that the senior demographic is set to expand by more than government projections show. State-run Korea Development Institute says by the year 2026, people 65 years and older will number 1 million more than what Statistics Korea forecasts, reaching 11.9 million. Now that's bigger than the population of Seoul City today. KDI noted that the National Statistics Office made its calculations by keeping life expectancy at the status quo without regards to medical advancements that would help extend a person's life. Adding that Korea's aging rate is faster than ever before, the think tank urged the government to adopt a new, more accurate projection model so that the government can set aside sufficient finances for welfare like national pension, basic pension, and health insurance. Well, it looks like the once close-knit relationship between Korea and China has run into a roadblock. Chinese tourists, who made up nearly half of the foreign visitors in the first half of this year, are turning elsewhere. And China-dependent Korean firms are seeing their share prices head south. This all against the backdrop of Korea's THAAD deployment. Our Lee Joo-young has more.
It has been just about a month since Seoul announced its decision to deploy the U.S. missile defense system THAAD to Korean oil, despite strong opposition from some of its neighboring countries. In the midst of vocal protests from China, a noticeable trend has emerged. Chinese visitors have been canceling their trips to Korea in droves. First was the Chicken and Beer Festival held in the southeastern city of Daegu. In less than 2 weeks after the announcement, roughly 300 Chinese visitors called off their trips last minute. 3,000 soccer fans who were scheduled to come to the World Cup preliminary match between Korea and China next month scrapped their plans as well. Companies heavily dependent on the Chinese market have also seen their share prices plunge on fears that anti-Korean sentiment will challenge their performance. Amora Pacific, one of the country's leading cosmetic companies, saw its shares slide 21% from 441,000 won, or roughly $400 to 363,000 won over the span of a month. Major entertainment companies like YG and SM also saw their shares nosedive by 24% and 36% respectively.
What's come to light is the fact that China has imposed stricter regulations against Korean cultural content, and this seems to be hurting entertainment stock.
The concern is that ongoing tensions may flare up anti-Korean sentiment in China and have greater long-term implications for sectors such as tourism, which rely on a steady stream of Chinese visitors. Especially with China's Mid-Autumn Festival coming up in September, as well as a Golden Week holiday beginning in early October, experts say some industries in Korea will likely face unforeseen losses as Seoul continues to work out its differences with the world's second-largest economy. Lee Joo-young, Business Daily.
Drone delivery could be a reality here in Korea, starting with the island areas within a couple of years. The government has big plans to infuse the logistics sector with innovative technology with the aim of creating 700,000 new jobs within 10 years. Our Eunice Kim has the details.
Eye-catching, and the government's latest plan is using next-generation technologies to invigorate the logistics sector. Delivery by drones to island areas will undergo testing through next year with the goal of launching the service by 2018. A three-wheeled electric car that emits no smoke or noise but is able to maneuver around narrow alleys is also in the works. By innovating logistics, the government is aiming to create 700,000 jobs in the sector through 2025. By pumping up sales to $135 billion from what's projected to be $82 billion this year, it wants to position Korea's competitiveness within the 10 best in the world. In order to foster new value-added services in logistics, it's also to build up infrastructure at the nation's ports and airports. For cross-industry convergence and to expand in-city logistics capabilities, it will build a high-tech urban logistics complex. It will also create a special cluster at Incheon Port to accommodate for fresh food exports by 2018. It'll also introduce a special ship fund with a value worth $1.2 billion to create extra-large, highly efficient vessels. At Korea's largest port in Busan, a support compound will be built to elicit business from processing and manufacturing companies. The country's top airport will also be equipped with a three-part logistics compound to facilitate companies offering both manufacturing and logistics services. With these changes, the government hopes to change the country's logistics paradigm from one that's focused on imports and exports to one that's driven by the private sector by offering new ways of looking at logistics services. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
It's been 6 months since the joint Kaesong Industrial Complex was shut down. And with North Korea still standing strongly behind its nuclear and missile ambitions, prospects of a reopening look bleak. Take a look.
On February 10th, South Korea pulled the plug on the inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex in response to Pyongyang's nuclear test in January and the launch of a long-range rocket in February. This was the first time that the South unilaterally halted operations at the complex after officially identifying it as a source of cash for the North's nuclear weapons program. In retaliation, North Korea kicked out all South Korean workers and froze their assets, while designating the complex a military-controlled zone. 6 months later, the park, which once housed 124 South Korean firms and 54,000 North Korean workers, remains shuttered. An emergency committee for South Korean Kaesong business owners on this Thursday requested permission to enter the Kaesong complex, with hopes to discuss how to deal with the assets left behind and check up on their facilities. But Seoul's unification ministry turned them down, saying that a visit would be inappropriate at a time when such strong sanctions are being imposed on the North. The committee is also demanding that a special law be drawn up, as they're seeking some $1.4 billion in compensation to cover their losses. The question that looms is, will South Korean businesses ever see their factories run again in the Kaesong complex, once considered one of the most important symbols of inter-Korean cooperation?
And to tell us more about this, we have Professor Kim Soo Hyun from Ewha Women's University joining us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, so over the past 6 months, what impact did the closure of the Kaesong Industrial Complex have on the South Korean economy? Because the companies involved were mostly smaller businesses.
That's right. First of all, Kaesong Industrial Complex was the symbol of North and South Korean economic cooperation. But as a part of the general sanction to Pyongyang, Korean government decided to close it in February this year. But in the economy-wide perspective, the impact is really small. The annual production of the Kaesong Industrial Complex in the last year was about 600 billion won, which is about the less than 0.05% of the GDP. However, as you said, all related companies are small and medium-sized. So at each company level, the impact is not negligible.
All right, then how do we expect the shutdown to have affected the North Korean economy?
Well, we say that Kaesong Industrial Complex was a dollar cash cow to Pyongyang's regime. The size of the cash flow from South to North Korea was about $120 million as of last year. So that is not small size considering their economic size. It is about 3% of the North Korean export. And in addition, there has been positive indirect interaction from South to North Korea. For example, the choco pie, which is South Korean product and my favorite too, became very popular between North Korean people. And that has been used as a cash in the North Korea. Okay. So that kind of positive impact from South to North Korea has been lost. And North Korean regime also lost very stable cash flow from South to North.
Now, but despite Seoul cutting off economic ties with Pyongyang, North Korea still remains largely dependent on China. So Beijing says it's upholding global sanctions against the North, but there are still a lot of loopholes that would minimize the entire impact.
Right, that's correct. But it is too early to talk about the direction of North Korea and China economic relation. Actually, at the beginning of this year, North Korea and China trade has been increased more than 10% from January to March. But after that, the situation has been really changed. As the UN sanction has started in the March, the trade between the two countries has been decreased over 4%, particularly in April and March.
All right.
But the situation is changing again very recently from the June of this year. So the trade between the two countries has been increased over 10%.
Wow.
So it is too early to talk about the changes of the direction of the two countries' economic relation.
Now, going back to South Korean firms that were operating in the Kaesong Industrial Complex, I mean, they have, without no doubt, have borne the brunt of the closure. So what kind of losses are we looking at, and how have they been compensated by the government?
Well, actually, there is a gap between Korean governments and the related companies estimate on the size of the loss from the Kaesong Industrial Complex. The related companies are saying that the total size of the loss is about 1.5 trillion Korean won. So they are arguing that at least about the 800 billion Korean won should be compensated from government. But so far, government has been compensated over $340 billion on 340 billion Korean won only.
Which is not even half of what they demanded.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, experts say that expectations for seeing any positive developments between the two Koreas are quite low in the foreseeable future. And given Seoul's stance right now, what would be the requirements to see this industrial park reopen?
Well, as of now, there are voices to restart the Kaesong Industrial Complex, particularly from related companies. But Korean government made it clear that with continuing activities of the nuclear bomb test and missile test, they can restart the Kaesong Industrial Complex. So the necessary condition for continuing or restarting Kaesong Industrial Complex should be discontinuing North Korean military activities related to missile test and nuclear bomb test.
So the South Korean government remains very firm on that stance.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in today, Professor.
Thank you very much.
And that wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back with more business news that matters to you. Until then, goodbye.